Once the activity of sex got really good and very, very pleasurable, and we went down the road of being adventurous with each other and open, but then I would go, man, but emotionally, we're still missing each other, and emotionally, we're still wounding each other.
Mm.
And that affects how I show up in the sexual arena when I'm emotionally wounded.
Welcome to the Get Your Marriage On podcast. I'm your host, Dan Purcell, a Christian marriage and intimacy expert and coach. I'm on a mission to help couples have the best sex and most emotionally intimate marriages possible. Our episodes cover topics you've always wondered about and are packed with practical advice designed to help you take your marriage to the next level. Understanding and making sense of our emotions is absolutely essential to living well. We have parts of our brain that are responsible for making sense of our emotions. We also have parts of our brain dedicated to mapping the emotional state of those around us. Sometimes couples come to me for coaching because they don't feel emotionally connected to spouse. There are a myriad of reasons why they struggle in this area. So, I invited Dr. Glen Hill, a marriage therapist, and his wife Phyllis onto this podcast to talk about their story and about the role of emotional connection in marriages. One thing I learned is when we use the word connection, we mean it in like we're not connected. It's a negative connotation to the type of connection. But often connected, sometimes we like the way we're connected, or sometimes we don't like the way we're connected, because being adversarially connected with your spouse, where you're fighting a lot, is still a form of connection. So learning to understand the difference between connection I like and connection I don't like is an important step forward in learning how to communicate emotionally with your spouse a whole lot better. And in this episode, Glen and Phyllis get vulnerable, and they're going to share a practice about how they relate to each other emotionally. My wife and I have been doing this practice daily for about 8 months now, so I can personally vouch for this. I encourage couples I coach to try this practice as well. So, before you hit the fast forward 30 seconds button on this podcast, I want you to understand how valuable your podcast reviews are. If you feel so inclined, please pause the episode and leave a review on Apple Podcasts now. If you hear your review read on the air, send me an email at support@getyourmarriageon.com and I will mail you a gift. Here's a recent review I want to share with you today. This person says, as someone recovering from good girl syndrome, this podcast has helped take our marriage to the next level. It shares the perfect balance of physical and emotional intimacy in the boundaries of marriage that we align with. Get Your Marriage On breaks the myth that married sex is boring. That's true. They teach how the evidenced support notion that monogamy truly brings a long-lasting satisfaction. We downloaded the Intimately Us app and look forward to a new episode every Friday. Thank you for that review. Also, check out our upcoming retreats, the virtual one in July and the in-person one in October. These are fun ways to really get your marriage on. Another very powerful way to get your marriage on is to check out our Get Your Marriage On program that we recently released. This is for couples that want to really deepen their intimate connection from the comfort of their home. It combines an in-depth program with live coaching, and we're all based on action because, hey, action is sexy. Check it out. Go to getyourmarriageon.com, click on our free masterclass, or look at the results page to see how this program has impacted hundreds of couples already and how it can really help you in your marriage. And now for Glen and Phyllis. Glen and Phyllis, welcome to the Get Your Marriage On podcast. How are you this morning?
Oh, amazing.
Yeah,
Thank you,
Good.
Dan,
I
for
love it.
having us. This is
Thanks.
so fun.
Let me ask you the question that I ask every new couple that I meet. First question I always ask them is, tell me about your honeymoon. Just kidding. That's not the first question I ask.
We can do that.
That'd be creepy. But I do want to know. Tell me about your honeymoon.
Oh, love that. Well, first of all, we've been married 41 years. So our honeymoon happened in 1982.
Mm.
And, our dating life was very, we are faith based. God was a center of our dating life. We followed the rules. We had the checklist. We did all the things, very much
Mm.
influenced by purity, culture, but also very responsible. Like, as in, we had a good job. We bought our first house right before we got married. We did the things that we felt were really the guarantee for success.
Uh-huh.
And, went into, like, even I just remember our first night, our honeymoon
Mm,
night, wedding night, that it to me, I went into it thinking, is the gift.
mm,
This is what we've waited
right,
for. This is the moment that we get to
yeah,
finally unwrap the gift, and it will be just
mm,
extraordinary and incredible, and our first encounter was far from that for me.
yeah. For me, it was the greatest 11 seconds of my life.
Well, yes, of course.
And I had no
Yes.
idea she was such an
Rice.
ungrateful person,
Yes.
startling.
And I was so disappointed and so shocked,
Mm,
actually, and yet didn't have the language to say that.
right,
Mhm.
Didn't know how to even express that that was
yeah,
not worth waiting for.
mm,
And we went, we were our honeymoon was at a honeymoon resort, and so everything kind of pointed in that direction.
Right. Uh-huh.
The ceiling above the bed was mirrors and all these things. And
Ooh.
yeah, and at that moment in my life, I just wanted to escape.
mm,
I wanted to do anything on this honeymoon
yeah,
except have sex, because the
Mhm.
first encounter was so
mm,
negative for
wow,
me. And so,
yeah,
again, that those 7 days created a lot of damage.
mm,
For Glenn, he was confused, he was hurt. We came home from the honeymoon and didn't know who to talk to, so
right,
just suffered in silence. We were very, very active in church and
mm,
had really, what we would say, were great friends and great community, but nobody talked to us before the honeymoon. And so we didn't know that you were even allowed to talk about it.
yeah,
And so it took so long to figure out. Matter of fact,
mm,
eventually I just determined, or we determined, that I was just broken and that was the problem. And so we were just going to suffer through it.
mm,
And, it was like, yes, of course we're supposed to have sex because that's what you do in
mm,
marriage. And yet it was duty. It was just my duty
right,
to show up in that space, not for pleasure, not for connection, but just because that's your duty. And eventually, through the help of friends, one conversation, it was a
mm,
couple of years in, one conversation changed everything, where I learned I wasn't broken. We just didn't know what we were doing. And
Yeah.
so the no pleasure then turned into pleasure. And it was like, oh my word, that changed
mm,
everything. And I think at that point in our lives, we decided no one should go into their
mm,
honeymoon not having someone talk
yeah,
to them.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
But by then, there'd been so much wounding. I
Yeah.
mean, back to our honeymoon, we did a tremendous amount of water skiing on our honeymoon because Phyllis figured out if we're on a boat with other people, ain't none of that sex stuff happening. So literally, we'd
Hmm.
have breakfast, and I'm thinking, "Hey, babe, you want to go back to our suite?" And she's like, "Oh, let's go ski a while." So we'd literally ski all day,
Hmm.
have dinner, and then I'd be like, "Okay, now," and Phyllis would be like, "I'm exhausted." And I was like, "Well, if you didn't water ski so dang much all day, you wouldn't be
Hmm.
exhausted." I didn't tell her that. But so it was incredibly hurtful for me. And so we set up that pattern. And again, it was
Hmm.
painful both physically and emotionally for her. So 2 years in, we learned some logistical things, which were
Hmm.
beneficial and helpful, but there had already been so much damage relationally, which
Yeah.
we did not understand at all. And so, really, we were 20 plus years in before we started unraveling all that and figuring out what had happened for us.
Well, and part of it too, Dan, is that once I realized that I wasn't broken
Mm,
and that sex could be fun, and we started saying we should be talking about this
mm,
amongst our
right.
Christian friends,
Yeah.
among other couples that are engaged, that are
Mm,
getting married. Well, then it just opened up this huge kind of platform where people were like, oh my word, you're willing to talk about this? Well, then it
yeah.
kind of went to, well, we should get really good at this if we're going to talk about this. And I think that for me, especially with other women, I realized, wow, we are in a box. We are in a very small
Right.
box where we are not allowed to do most things. So we better obey the rules in the box. And then
Mm,
we just got really curious, like, who created the box? Who made the rules? And so as we began talking about it, and especially we were just, before we knew it, we were asked to
mm,
talk about it in a lot of places. And maybe I was more than you because women were willing to talk
mm,
about it.
mm,
And
right.
but that's, kind of that, we went down the road of, let's get really good. And so I would say our sexual activity was really good. And so to us, it was if
Mm,
you have great sex, you're going to have a phenomenal marriage and you're never going to have conflict or fights. And so that's, I think, where you're going with that. Like 20 years in, we realized, wait, we're still fighting
right.
and our conflicts last for days.
Mm,
So something is still off here. We're missing each other somewhere in all of this.
mm,
Because once we figured out the sex piece, we thought we would be
right.
perfect in our
Yeah,
relationship.
yeah, and that was not the case at all, which led us to where we are today. At one point in the 2000s, Phyllis said, "Babe, as hard as you work, we should be rich, and we're not rich, so you got to do something different." And she said, "You have to quit working." And I'm like, "You must not understand economics, because if I quit working, we'll be even less rich." She said, "No, no, no, I'll take care of the money side." And she built a business, which was phenomenal. That's a whole other story, which is just amazing that she had the courage to do that. That's a lot. And so I went back to school and I was like, I have to figure this out. How is it possible that this young couple, 24 hours before their wedding, were excited about happily ever after? 48 hours after their wedding, they were wrecked and
Mhm.
overwhelmed and didn't have a clue what had just happened, didn't have the tools to process it through together, had no relationships to be able to process it at all, and that continued for over 2 decades. And we're sitting there going, "This can't be. There's no we did not marry as a practical joke. We did not
Mhm.
marry,
Yeah.
just because we like to suffer." And then especially being faith-based, we're like, "Wait, who designed this horrible setup? Whose idea was this? Oh, we believe in God. We believe God established it." Well, what a crappy prankster he turned out to be, that he set us up because
Mhm.
we believed that this was going to be good. We got scammed because this is not good. And again, our sexual interaction had gotten better, but we still had no idea how to actually connect relationally. And so that began the quest, where I went back to school, studied. And then because she was working and providing income, I was able to devote that time to it. I began researching just the human condition, the human experience. What causes these young couples? I've never been to the wedding where part of the vows is, we'll be madly in love for maybe 6 months, 2 years, whatever, and then we'll dissipate into some level of blahness. I've never heard those
Mhm.
marriage vows. Never, not one time. I go to a lot of weddings. So I thought, how can this be? All these couples are thinking this is going to be amazing, and then it's not. And, the
Mhm.
statistics are ridiculous as far as how unsuccessful marriage is, certainly in our culture, but most cultures around the world. So my quest was to figure out what causes humans to disconnect relationally. I discovered that scientifically, just what happens. And just so you know, I'm the educated one. Phyllis is the smart one. She's the one that actually figures out what matters. I come up with all the theories. So when I presented that to her, and I remember the day I came home, I'm like, "Babe, I think I found it. I think I've figured out what causes people to disconnect." And she's like, "Well, yeah, but people would rather know what causes people to connect." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I didn't think about that." So she said, "What if you reverse that? What if you flip it? Is that what causes connection?" And it is. So as usual, she was correct. And now we know how to get people to connect deeply relationally, which is what we now call the connection codes. And it's called codes because we're coded for this. We're actually born this way. This isn't a foreign language that you have to learn. It's actually the language of your birth that you've forgotten. If we told people, look, if you'll learn fluent Latin, you can connect deeply in your relationship. Well, they could learn it. I mean, people
Mhm.
speak Latin, but gracious, really? How long is that going to take me? A year, 2 years, 3 years? But this is actually already inside you. We just have to reactivate it, which is pretty amazing.
So when you went back to school, Glenn, what did you study?
Well, I started out just finishing up my undergrad, and then I studied marriage and family therapy. I became a licensed marriage and family therapist. And then my PhD is in sexology. So I'm a clinical sexologist because I wanted to, well, a variety of reasons, but one of those was I wanted to understand sexuality because I
Mhm.
know that's such a piece. And that was before we really connected deeply. Again, we were having better sexual activity. It was more pleasurable, but we still were missing each other so much. So I wanted to figure out that piece, and it's fun studying sex. The greatest degree in the world
I
to have a
I
PhD in
agree,
sexology.
100%.
I think I get to talk about sex all day, every day. But I just wanted to study that and figure out how is this possible that this thing is supposed to be this amazing gift actually
Mhm.
becomes this incredible curse.
Part of just our story, because once the activity of sex got really good and very, very pleasurable, and we kind of figured out the box. We
Mm,
were like, you know what? We weren't supposed to have a box. So let's be adventuresome.
mm,
And went down the road of being adventurous with each other and open. I wanted to be that person for Glenn,
mm,
and it was wonderful. But then I would go, man, but emotionally, we're still missing each other, and
right.
emotionally, we're still wounding each other,
Mm,
and that affects how I show up in the sexual arena when I'm emotionally wounded. So then I had at that moment, like, do I disassociate and
mm.
just show up
Wow.
in the sexual arena, or do I learn to connect to the emotion of
Yeah.
what I'm feeling? And that is a huge shift that we went into, and a story that we often tell, we call it the dishwasher story. Um and this is what happened with us over and over and over. I would come into the kitchen to start dinner and think, "Oh, I need to still unload the dishwasher so that I can load it after we're done eating." And I would open it and find that it was already unloaded. And so Glenn would kind of come through the room on his way to somewhere else, and I would say, "Hey, babe, thanks for unloading the dishwasher."
Mm,
And then he would say something really snarky back. Well, it's not like it's the only thing I've done today. And right there, we would just hit a wall with each other. And I would be like, you could just say you're welcome.
mm.
And, this happened over and over.
Yeah.
And eventually, when I would say thank you for unloading the dishwasher and he responded with a snarky response, I would just turn away from him.
Mm,
I stopped even responding to that.
yeah.
And one day, we were probably 20 years into our marriage, and that same scenario
Mm,
happened. And when he said it, I turned to him
mm,
and I came over, and I remember it. I remember the house we were living in at that moment. I remember turning from the sink, and I touched him and
mm,
I said, "Babe, what do you hear me say when I say
mm.
thank you for unloading the
Mm,
dishwasher?"
yeah, yeah, and when that was actually the follow-up question, because first she said, "What happens for you whenever I say that?"
Mhm.
Mhm.
And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, what do you hear me say whenever I say that?" And I said, "I hear you say what you said." And I didn't say the B word, but I thought it.
Uh-huh.
And she
That's
said,
a
"Yeah, yeah,
good
yeah."
question,
And
by
at
the
any
way, that
point,
Phyllis asked. That's really insightful.
right? Oh,
Mhm.
Mhm.
yes, it's amazing.
What
So,
do
well,
you
that
hear me
shifted,
say when I say
right? Yeah.
blank? Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And, but again, by that point, I'm already lit up, and I'm like, "I hear you say what you said." And she said, and she could have turned away from me at any point and been like, "You're ridiculous," rolled her eyes and walked out of the room, and she didn't. She stayed in it, which takes incredible courage. She
Mhm.
stayed in it, and she said, "Yeah, but tell me the message that you hear." Well, I was living with the person that I viewed as one of the most productive people on the planet. That's how I experienced her. She's perpetual motion. Everybody wants her on their projects and tasks and missions because she'll get stuff done. I'm fun to have around, but I don't get nearly as much stuff done as her. So when she would say thanks for loading the dishwasher, I'm hearing her insult me. I'm hearing her
Mhm.
go, "Whoa, everybody, it's amazing. Glenn did something useful for a change. He's usually this lazy sluggard that sits in the corner, just eating candy. But well, let's have a celebration because he did
Mhm.
something useful for a change." None of that had anything to do with Phyllis. That was all about what was happening inside of me. And she slowed this couple down to find out what was happening for
Mhm.
me. And I was able to tell her. And it's something that we call the ooh. She gave me the first ooh of our relationship. She said, "Oh, that's what makes you
Mm.
respond the way you respond. I've just insulted you, and I've been telling you for years that you should say you're welcome to an insult.
Mhm.
I should insult you profusely. I should talk about what a loser, failure, idiot you are, and then you should say, 'You're welcome.'" Well, that didn't make any sense. Of course, she had no idea for only 20 years that that's what was happening for me. And I had no words, no tools to tell her that's what was happening for
Were you
me.
just missing
And
each
now,
other, or was there any truth to any of
oh,
that,
yeah.
Phyllis? Was there a little bit of a spirit of contempt in your praise for unloading the dishwasher?
In that actual sentence, "Thanks for unloading the dishwasher," it was completely motivated, just pure appreciation. I was aware that I got more done than he did. I was aware that But I felt like we had a great partnership
Mm,
because he was the people person. He was the one who tuned into the kids. He would sit and talk to them for hours. I can't sit that long. Our dinner table and our sink it was all open. So I always was the one that got up first from the dinner table and just started cleaning the kitchen while
Mm,
he talked with the kids and they talked to their dad. And I would hear the engagement and love it, but I couldn't I w- for me to sit that long after dinner, I it's like
mm,
I was just that was not a joy for me. That was not even in my universe. Like I couldn't get there. For
Mhm.
me, it's like, oh, this means I'll stay up till 11 p.m.
mm,
because of this and this and this that has to be done before I go to bed. And so I just appreciated our partnership. Like for
mm,
me, I loved it wasn't until probably in the more recent years, our kids are all grown, married, we have 12 grandchildren, that I realized I missed out on a lot
mm,
because I was the task oriented one. I missed out on those talks at the
mm,
dinner table. I missed out on connecting emotionally with our kids. And so but in the moment, when he did like unload the dishwasher, I really did appreciate. And so my thank yous were really genuine. And I was so confused how his response was
right.
not, he didn't receive it as
Yeah.
just genuine.
Yeah. Yeah. And we had that excuse me, that sort of pattern
Hmm.
literally thousands of times.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And we now know from research came out probably about 20 years ago, that the brain doesn't distinguish physical pain from emotional pain. And so what's happening in an interaction like that is the person literally has been stabbed as far as what the brain knows. Now, the body doesn't know that, but the brain is experiencing that Phyllis just jabbed Glenn in the shoulder with with an ice pick. And and again, this had nothing to do with Phyllis, but this is what Glenn's experiencing. This is what his brain is recognizing. It's emotional pain, it's hurt, and I feel stabbed. Well, that's going to be tough for me to want to have connecting conversation in 10 minutes because I still have an ice pick in my shoulder and I'm bleeding. Well, she didn't know that. She literally had zero idea that that's what was happening. And this is what happens for so many couples in their sexual relationship. And it could be either party, but he wounds her 7 times during the day. So he kicks her in the shin, he stomps on her foot, he stabs her in the shoulder with an ice pick. So by whatever 8:30 that evening, she's been wounded 9 times. And then he says, "Hey, babe, you want to like get frisky?" And she's like, "I'm still bleeding throughout the day from when you wounded me." Well, he doesn't know that, and so he doesn't understand how come she's being so cold and
Well, and the
rejecting.
wounding can come from something as simple as
Absolutely,
saying thank you for unloading the
yeah,
dishwasher.
yeah,
So on paper, no one would say, "Oh, that is a wounding, don't do that."
mm,
But in our interaction for Glenn, it was wounding.
yeah,
And so that moment, that dishwasher moment changed so much for us
mm,
because when I learned what he was receiving when I said thank you, oh my goodness, my compassion, I mean, I just melted because I realized, wow, there are so often that I am wounding you and I have no idea that
mm,
when I am thanking you for things, you're hearing it in a way
mm,
that is wounding. And I know that I think many of us were raised where the answer is, Glenn, change who you are, get
mm,
over it. Thank you is an appropriate human response, human saying. And yet that doesn't work. And
You just
so,
paper
and
over
I
the
had,
it's like a Band-Aid. You just paper overing the
yes,
real issue,
yeah,
yes.
right?
hmm
And for years, I had even responded back to him. Humans say you're welcome. Like, and that
mm,
was even more wounding and insulting because he wasn't wanting to experience pain or wounding of me saying thank you. He just did.
mm,
And it kind of led us down a road where, first of all, when he would react in a way that I thought, something's not
mm,
quite matching up here for what I'm thinking the response should be, I would then say, babe, what are you hearing me say?
mm,
And it changed our interaction where I could slow down with him, I
yeah,
could lean into him, touch him. And then he began really unmasking
mm,
and showing me what was really happening for him
yeah,
every day, all day long.
yeah,
And it was incredible for us because it changed our emotional
mm,
relationship with
right,
each other.
yeah,
I
Mhm.
made space for who he was. I made space for the wounding, for his pain, for
yeah,
the ways that I hurt him that I would have never dreamed I was hurting him. And it kind of opened the door because when he went back to school and had time to do research, it really did go into the emotional part
Mm,
of who we are as people, because it's like you begin to realize so many times we miss each other
mm,
emotionally because we're having two different experiences
right.
with the same
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah. And understand, I was not trying to feel hurt. And what we typically do in
Mhm.
those situations, what we do culturally is we say, well, Glenn, don't feel hurt. She didn't mean anything bad by that. Okay. So shoot me, I guess. I mean, what are you going to do? I'm not trying to feel hurt. I don't know the people who try to feel
Mm.
pain. I've never met that person. I've never met the person who tries to feel fear.
Mhm.
And in our faith based communities, there's been a tremendous push for centuries. This is not a new
Mhm.
development that we say, don't feel fear. Choose faith, not fear. Well, who's choosing fear? I want to meet those people. I've never met a person ever who gets up in the morning and says, what's my plan for the day? Oh, I know. I'm going to choose fear. I don't know those people. So I don't think it happens. So I was feeling pain. I was. Now,
Mhm.
this has nothing to do with Phyllis, even though it looks like it's all about Phyllis, because she's the one saying the thing from which, my pain is
Mhm.
being activated. But now we are really, really fluent in this language. So I'm able to tell her in that moment that I just felt hurt. Not her fault. Was she involved? Well, yeah. Did she contribute to it? Yeah, but it's not her fault. She was just involved in the process, but her saying thanks for unloading the dishwasher or whatever, or something of that nature. And all of us have the ability to be unkind. I'm not saying that Phyllis has never been unkind or Glenn's never been unkind. We certainly have been, but by and large, most people are not doing it on purpose. But I
Mhm.
did feel pain. And you can tell me to stop it, and you can tell me to shut up about it, or you can be what we call the ooh. You can ooh me, be present with me, and help me process that pain. What is stunning to us now
Mm.
is our tense moments virtually never go more than 30 seconds. That blows my mind because I remember
Mhm.
20 years of not 30-second pain, 3 hours, 3 days, literally 3 weeks. That was our specialty, was the 3-week disconnect,
The
and we're
Mhm.
Cold
drowning in
War.
pain.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, well, yeah, we're drowning in pain for 3 weeks, and our disconnects just overlapped. We didn't even know when one ended and the next one began because we were virtually always disconnected. And now we disconnect usually 3 or 4 times a year. We used to disconnect 3 or 4 times before breakfast, and it blows my mind that this is even possible. I would
Mhm.
not have thought that it was not that many years ago, and now I just marvel at this. And this is the reason we're passionate about the connection because we see what's happening in our own life and people, tens of thousands of people around the world, and we're like, wow, we got to propagate this because this is working.
Before you tell me about the connection codes themselves, I want to fast forward your story from the dishwasher moment. I think it's fast forward a few years. Phyllis, you lost a parent, I think.
Mm.
Mm,
Yeah. Yeah.
And can you tell me about what you learned about emotions around that phase of your life? Because I
Yeah,
think
well,
a
absolutely.
lot of people can relate to you, Phyllis. You're the task person, you're the doer, and you
Mhm.
get a lot of satisfaction out of checking the box, getting things done.
Mhm.
But like what you said, looking back, you miss out on some of those crucial
mm,
emotional connections. And I love that story because it kind of illustrates how we really are connecting emotionally, but sometimes we hide it or stuff it.
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
well,
So, as we mentioned, Glenn went back to school and I started a company and had great success, which even fit all the
mm,
more into my task checklist world that I was, wow, more successful than I ever dreamed I could be because I was a stay at home mom before that. And around my 50th birthday, my mom, who was one of my closest friends, talked to her every day on the phone.
mm,
She was dying of cancer. And it's like that's the moment that my world started to unravel.
mm,
And I could no longer handle all the responsibilities of my company and what was happening with my mom.
mm,
And Glenn was doing a ton of research at that time.
mm,
And he would come home and see that I was just really out of kilter.
mm,
And it was during this time that I kind of turned a corner in my life where I could no longer spin all the plates that I had been spinning so well for decades. And they started to fall one by one. And one of them was just my health. I had at that point been a great sleeper, very healthy person, loved exercise, loved all the things. And all of a sudden, my body stopped cooperating and I stopped sleeping, which was terrifying. And you can't do that for many days. You go crazy.
mm,
And so he was watching this and began to talk to me about just emotions And I just remember, like, looking at him like, "I don't do emotions. You're the emotional one. You
Yeah.
have enough emotion for both of us. I opt out, remember?" And again, at this point, we've been married a long time,
Mm.
almost 30 years. And of course, he was learning that we all have a region in our
Mm.
brain that houses emotion. You can't opt out. They're firing all day long. And if
Mm.
you don't acknowledge them, you don't learn to process them, you don't learn to recognize them, then your body is storing them. And eventually, your body can't store anymore. So, this sadness that I was feeling with my mom, I remember even saying to him, "I don't have time to be sad." Because I thought if you slow down with sad,
Mm.
you go into depression, you go into, an inability to even get out of bed. That's how I thought that if you acknowledge sad,
Yeah.
that
Uh-huh.
that would happen, or cry. Like, I was like, "I can't cry.
Mm.
Right.
I can't cry about my mom because I don't have time to be sad or to
Yeah,
cry."
in that same year that her mom is passing away, her business quadrupled, which is a dream, a business
Mhm.
owner's dream. It's like, whoa, the business quadrupled. But that combination of things
That stress.
pushed Phyllis to the brink,
Mhm.
and she didn't know what to do. And I remember the day that I said to her, just talked about emotions. Again, I was just researching all this, learning it. I didn't know all this, that every human experiences emotion because I was married to someone who insisted that she did not and maybe never had. We don't know for sure. So she would say, "I don't have time to be sad." And it dawned on me one day, I said, "Babe, I'm not trying to get you to be sad.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
are sad. You're
Mhm.
already sad. So I'm not trying to introduce this as a
Uh-huh.
daily goal. This is already happening to you. You're not choosing sad.
Uh-huh.
This is there."
But it's a willingness to feel what you feel, right? That's
Right. Yeah. But we've been told culturally not to do that. We've been
right.
told that you choose your emotions. You need to control your emotions. There's not a human on the planet that can control their emotions. You can control your behavior, which is after the emotion, and maybe 2 seconds after the emotion, but no one can control their emotions. And so when she started getting that, she was startled by it and
Mhm.
argued. She was a very difficult case study
Uh-huh.
because she was like, "Nope, nope, not me, not me. You can do all of your research, all your school stuff with those other people, not me." And of course, this is my partner, so I'm thinking, well, you're a human too, and that was just such an amazing, and it wasn't easy. I mean, it wasn't easy for her, it wasn't easy for us. That
Mhm.
she began realizing, oh, I'm just a human, and
Mhm.
I am experiencing what I'm experiencing. And I need to learn how to process that. I need to learn how to relax into myself and my own experience.
Mhm.
Great.
Yeah. And, part of it for me, once I understood that my brain housed emotion,
Mm,
the scientific fact of that, and the fact that that meant God created me to have a brain that houses emotion, that blew my mind.
yeah.
At 50 years old, I'm like, why did no one ever tell me this?
Yeah.
Why is this not being taught and preached every Sunday morning? Every Bible study ever. Why is this not known? Even in science, all the science classes I took when I was in school,
Mm,
no one ever said, "Hey, this is your brain.
yeah.
You have emotion." So, it for me it was an overnight, okay, if my brain houses emotion, oh my word. I've been saying and believing with all my heart, I don't do emotion, and that is fine. That's a better way. It's a better way to get tasks done. Emotion just trips you up. Emotion
Mm,
slows you down. Emotion messes you up. That was my proof. I mean, I'm like, look how successful I am.
right.
It's because I don't do emotion. And so when I finally learned that actually you have
Mm,
it, then I'm like, how in the heck do I find it? Because I
mm,
don't know that I'm feeling sad. I don't know that I have fear. Like, I think I don't have any emotion.
mm,
And so for me, it's been quite the journey.
mm,
Let me tell you, 10 years, I'm now 61, 10 years of, oh, what am I feeling? What
mm,
is happening with me right now? And it's been such a journey of untangling
mm,
myself
yeah.
from what I've had fear of just experiencing emotion. Like
Mm,
I'm like, "Ooh, just last year, big year for me, anger." I'm like, "Wow, core level anger? No." I learned as a kid, you do not have anger. You just hide from it. It's scary. Anger is scary. and it's wrong. Anger
Uh-huh.
is wrong.
Uh-huh.
And so to go, wait, there's a part of my brain that's firing anger. And if I don't tune in, then I'm storing it. And that tears my body down.
Mm,
So I got to acknowledge it. I got to find it. I got to
yeah,
talk about it.
yeah.
And that's been a huge, huge shift for me for sure.
Right, and part of the research, what we realized the significance of this, the limbic system is the central command center for emotions. Emotions occur throughout the body, but the
Uh-huh.
limbic system is the command center in the brain. The limbic system engages before the cortexes. The
Uh-huh.
cortexes are where the executive functions of the brain happen, thought, reason, logic, etc. And what we're doing is telling people to be logical, to be reasonable, to be
When you can't.
sensible,
Mhm.
to think better. And the equivalent is I take Dan into a room and I say, dude, read this. There's a eye chart on the opposite wall. Read that. And he can't read it. And I'm
Uh-huh.
like, dude, try harder. And then we realize the room is filled with smoke.
Uh-huh.
And it does not matter how hard Dan tries. He cannot read that eye chart. And I'm like, what's the matter with you? I thought you were literate. You don't even know your alphabet. And Dan's like, I can't read the eye chart. Well, the reason you can't read is not because you're an idiot. You can't read it because the room is filled with smoke. And until we clear that room out of the smoke, you will never be able to read that. And I keep saying, try harder, try harder, try harder. And Dan's like, well, I can't read it. So
Right.
that's what's happening in the brain. The limbic system is flooded. The
Mhm.
cortexes will not engage, certainly not effectively. And now you're a dumber version of yourself. Not because you're dumb, it's because you're human. And that happens
Mhm.
for every human on the planet.
Which is a great cue for one of my favorite phrases I say on this podcast, and it's to calm the heck down,
Mm,
right? You got to calm your limbic system down. You got to clear the smoke, as you're saying. And that's a skill we can learn. And that's what you were doing, Phyllis.
right. Most people don't know how to do that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the tools that we teach with the connection codes is what we call the core emotion wheel.
Mm,
And kind of where that came from is for me, I just needed something simple where I could learn how to tune in to me, but it couldn't take a lot of time. Number 1,
mhm.
I didn't have time.
I'd bring
Number
home like a 195-page report. I'm like,
Yeah,
babe,
no,
you got to
no.
read this. It's so interesting. She's like,
Uh-uh.
really? Give me the
Like
cliff notes of the cliff notes.
Yeah, and so I'm like, I'm not gonna read anything, and
Yeah.
I'm not gonna do a course, and I won't even read a book, nonetheless, a report or anything else. And so Glenn at that point realized, okay, we've got to have a way to do this where I can every day
Mm,
kind of do a practice where I am tuning in to what is happening with me. And so we would love to show that to your
Yes.
audience by just doing it, by demonstrating how this works. And, we will give you, I think you'll put it in your show notes. We want all of your people to have it for free, and there's rules that you can read when you download it. There's a video that you can see how to use it, but it was life changing
yeah.
for me.
Yeah.
And 10 years in, I am still using the
Mhm.
same tool. People all over the world are using it because 8 words, you can grasp 8 words, and
And it's the human condition. It just
yeah,
is. That's the way it is.
and it can be translated into any
Right.
language. It just
Yep.
communicates beautifully cross culturally.
Yeah.
So we would love, if this is a good time to do it, Dan, we would love to
That'd
do
be
the core
great.
emotion wheel.
And for those of you watching this on YouTube, yeah, show it, hold it up. And those of you just listening, you can download this wheel. Great. It looks like a wheel, looks like a pie split into 8 pieces, and it's color coded. So let's review. What are the 8 areas?
Well, the 5 regions are
Uh-huh.
anger, fear, pain, pleasure, and disgust. We divide disgust into 2, guilt and shame, because they look identical on a brain scan, but they appear very differently with facial expression and body language. And then pain, we delineate because they look so different on a brain scan. Uh, Hurt, sad, and lonely. And you think about the experience of that, hurt feels very different than lonely. If you feel wounded, if you feel hurt by your wife, that feels a little bit different than lonely. You may also experience loneliness, but it feels different and it actually looks different on a brain scan. So that's how we come up with the 8 instead of just the 5 regions.
And then this is a part, what we call, you can do an issue specific core emotion wheel,
Yeah.
or you can just do what is the other is just general. So an issue specific is like you go, oh, wow, that situation last night.
Mm,
Can we just do the wheel about it? But sometimes you start general and you realize, wow,
mm,
it became
mhm.
super specific
Right.
because I really have emotion around a lot of
Yep.
that. So, do you want me to go first?
Yeah. So we're going to do it on sex?
Oh, that's always a great
Okay.
topic.
Yeah.
And just we didn't say this before, but this is a 2-minute per person exercise. And that's really, really important
Right.
because if it's longer than that, you lose each other.
Mm,
All right, so I'm gonna do it on sex.
mm.
You wanna do it on
Yeah,
sex?
yeah.
That's great.
Cool.
Okay, I'm gonna go right to hurt. I
Mm,
felt some hurt last night
mm.
when you kind of spiraled on
Right.
our sex date.
Yeah.
Felt some sad that it happened, and I felt the energy coming towards me that almost like it was my
Oh, wow.
fault. Probably for a split second there, I felt lonely in it because I was so excited and very interested in what we had planned out.
Yeah.
And then I saw we derailed. So felt
Mm,
lonely in that moment, felt ton of joy that
mm.
I kept you engaged,
Wow.
that I did not lose you, that
Mm,
I pulled you back in
yeah.
and felt a lot of joy. I did have fear
Mm.
that I would not be able to do that, that you were
Oh,
too
yeah.
far gone
Mm,
in what you were experiencing. So a lot of joy that that happened,
mm.
but definitely some fear in that. And I think in those moments, I do feel anger that you are easily derailed.
Right.
And I know that's our history, our story, but I almost feel like 41 years in, it's almost like
Mm,
everything has to line up perfectly
right.
for things to go well.
Yeah.
So some anger in that. Guilt, guilt or shame over last night. I don't know. Cuz I could take the guilt on the power went out of the fridge, but
Mm,
that wasn't my thing. Like I
right.
just happened to
Yeah.
discover it.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I don't know that I felt guilt and shame in that. I know I have a history of our past, so when it comes to
Mm,
sex in general, I would say I have guilt and shame over just our history of
yeah.
pain and hurt
Mm,
and rejection and pushing you away and not being as interested. So I do have guilt and shame over that.
mm. Okay. Yeah. Get that. Wow. Thank
Mm,
you. So for me, yeah, tons of joy over last night. You were a
mm,
superstar, just so powerful. I mean,
oh,
I adore you already, but just seeing you being
yeah.
powerful was pretty spectacular. I should have
Um,
videoed it if it was
mm,
that good. A lot of shame in that. I get derailed so easily. I get knocked off
mm,
course, and I present not as the best version of me, which
yeah.
stinks.
Wow.
And guilt in that because that's not fair to you. Like
Mhm.
you mentioned, the fridge, you had nothing to do with that, and
Right.
I just get distracted and knocked off course, and then you
Mhm.
end up because it's a partnership, a sexual partnership, and you end up
Mm.
being hindered by that.
Yeah.
Last night I felt a lot of fear that because I could tell that this was getting knocked off course, getting
Mhm.
derailed, and it just, you mentioned spiral. I can just feel it happening, and I feel a lot of
Yeah.
fear that it's the train is picking up speed and then running
Wow.
off the rails.
Mm.
Some lonely in that, just that the tasks ended up, me just being responsible for it, and
Yeah.
we weren't expecting it, and all of a sudden there's all this is just appeared and it had to be
Mhm.
dealt with. Sad in that, but certainly sad just the happening last
Yeah.
night, but the fact that so much of our history,
Yeah.
the trauma from that has set us up. So,
Mm.
there's such a trigger response, trauma response from many years gone by. Would have been
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
nice if someone had helped us early on, given
Yeah.
us a clue.
Mm.
Hurt. I don't know that I had any hurt last night about that specifically. Of course, tons of hurt over the years
Yeah.
in our
Yeah.
sexual relationship or lack of such, where we
Mm.
missed each other
Wow.
so much. But then, oh, let's see. Did I say anger?
I don't think so.
Okay, so anger. Yeah, it pisses me off just that I'm that easily derailed, that we have
Mm.
that history, that there's trauma responses, and that we can miss that easily, miss with each other,
Mm.
which leads me back to the joy, just that because you're in it too, and you're a real person too, and you just were
Mm.
powerful and said, screw it, I'll make this
Mm.
work anyway, which is just
Yeah.
spectacular. I'm so honored that you would care enough about me to do
Wow.
that. Pretty amazing.
Yeah. Mm.
Mm.
Wow.
Thanks for demonstrating that. I think every couple
Mhm.
could
Oh, yeah.
use an emotions check-in every day. And I like the way you're doing it.
Yep.
Yeah,
You're hitting all
absolutely.
8. That's the goal, right? Like pick
Mhm.
something and see if
Yes.
there's a little bit
Yes.
of
Right.
all 8 in that. And that's
Hmm.
instructive because we don't experience just one emotion discreetly.
Absolutely.
It's
Right.
it's usually a
Right.
blend.
Yep.
So,
So you will you do it, Dan?
all right, is it my turn?
Yep.
Yeah, it's yours, and you
Okay.
don't have to do it issue specific. It can be just in
Yeah.
general.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I was late arriving this morning for our podcast interview,
Mm,
so that's heavy on my mind. So,
Okay.
mm,
there's definitely guilt of like, "Oh,
mm,
no, I'm making them late. These are my guests. I've been looking forward to connecting with them,
Mm.
mm.
and
Wow.
Mm.
I hate making people wait on me." That's one thing that
Mm.
I
Mm.
feel I'm very aware of. Like, if I'm holding up somebody, don't like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And a little bit of shame,
Mhm.
like, I'm supposed to be a professional here, and even while we're sitting, I'm
Mhm.
hooking up my microphone, getting my headphones in, like,
Right.
I was clearing out my background, like, it wasn't very professional of me, so there's a little bit of shame, like, I
Mm,
want my
I get
honored
that.
guest to perceive me as a
Yeah.
professional here, and here I am,
Hear
like,
yeah.
that.
scrambling to get things ready.
Mhm.
There's definitely joy in connecting with great
Mm,
guests, and just
mm.
I lose
Mm.
myself in your story, and I see a little piece of myself and a little piece
Wow.
of my wife and
Mm,
Mhm.
everything in what you're saying, and there's joy
Wow.
in connecting with great people, and so I feel that too.
cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mm.
Fear, I mean, for me, there's always that imposter syndrome whenever hit the record button and I'm going on air. So
Mm.
there's some,
Mm.
I would put that in the fear
Wow.
category because it's just not my, I'm an introvert. I'm not a great
Mm,
public speaker, or there's things at least I tell myself at least. So there's fear behind
mm.
Mhm.
podcasting in general.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Wow.
disgust, I can't think of a disgust emotion right now in this, other than the fact that I didn't shave this morning, so I'm a little self-conscious of that. But, those listening
Mm,
can't tell. Anger, I don't feel anger right now in this situation. I don't feel lonely or hurt per se, but, I do have a great excuse why I was late this morning. So, there's a lot
mm.
of joy around why I was late because there's a good reason why I'm late. So,
Wow. I hear you.
yeah.
Cool.
Love that.
Love it. Thank you.
Wow, that's so good.
Yeah.
And so, just for your listeners, when you start this, and this was the thing for me that I had to really find
Mm,
let's see, you mentioned, oh, I don't feel any lonely right now. And often what we say is, well, when was the last time you felt lonely, or when was a
mm.
big time you felt lonely?
Right.
Because for most of the time, you do experience all eight emotions like kind of constantly. And we're just not always
Mm,
aware, or we have
yeah.
defined like lonely. Sometimes we only associate with people
Mm,
instead of thinking, wait, I feel all alone in this endeavor. Or, even this morning, you were alone and trying to get your studio set
right.
up.
Mhm.
And so it's like, oh, yeah, there is some lonely in that. No one else was there moving stuff around or,
Mm.
getting the set ready
Oh, yeah.
and it's just that we think of some of these emotions that have to be bigger or they have to feel stronger. And so we kind of miss ourselves with that. And I know for me, it's been doing this every day and hitting all eight
Mm,
and not skipping is
mhm.
really important. And,
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier, anger has been a really big one for me because I do this and I have done it for 10 years. But I would say anger was always a much bigger, like, I feel anger that there's a war going on. I feel anger that there's school shooting.
Mm,
But I couldn't get to a personal anger until I did a lot of work last year and then started going down the road of,
yeah.
oh, I feel anger towards my mom
Mm,
because she didn't stand up to my dad and she never had a voice when
mm,
we were young. And I'm like, I'm not even comfortable in that because I
mm,
adored my mom so much. And I'm just so shocked that my anger last year, like starting that journey took me back to anger towards my mom. But it's been really a great journey and my body has responded really well. Like, oh, I am actually feeling better. And I can tell that this is releasing this out of my body that I've
mm,
been storing it for a very long
yeah.
time.
Yeah, and the vast majority of people don't remember the language. They knew it when they were babies. Everybody did.
True.
Every baby
Yeah.
on the planet does. And then we forgot it, and we don't even
Mhm.
recognize that. Oh, if you'd asked me 30 years ago, Glenn, how often do you feel shame? I would have said never because I was swimming in
Mm.
it. I was drowning in it. So, does a fish know that it's wet? I don't know. I've never interviewed a fish, but probably not. So now I get hit with shame, maybe as much as I did 30 years ago. The difference is I process it in 10 seconds. I
Mhm.
process it in 12, 15 seconds because I've done the wheel so many times I know how to do that. I mean, we've literally done the wheel thousands of times. And so we have relearned that language. We now are fluent in that language, and I can recognize it in the moment, the second that it happens, and I can process it immediately.
Mhm.
So good. As we conclude, let's tie this back to developing a great sexual relationship, because that's something we talk about a lot on this podcast. So
Yeah.
I'm going to ask
Mhm.
it
Yeah.
this way. Let's say you're a couple, you've downloaded the Core Emotions wheel
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
we're going
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
link to in the show notes. They're checking in with each other better. It's like a meditation, right? It's something that you do over and over and you become more sensitive to your
Right.
internal emotional world. You're getting better at that.
Hmm.
Now, what are your black belt sex tips? How do you take kind of, you're at a good, healthy baseline and now you want to take things to the next level?
I will jump. I'm pretty fast at this. And I also do want to say, like, we develop master classes on the basic foundations, which is the core emotion wheel and all the study of emotion. But we also did one on sex because we knew that we had a lot to say about that. So we have a master class on that. If you put the Dan into that as a code, you'll get a discount if you want to purchase that. I would say the biggest thing is that we have learned to be able to communicate by saying, I feel sexual joy.
Mm.
I am experiencing sexual joy. It tunes Glen in. He's like, ooh, what's happening with sexual joy? And I'm like, well, I was just thinking it'd be really fun tonight to play sexually. And then we just open up the
Right.
communication. He does
Yeah.
that with me. I do that with him. We say things like, oh, I'm feeling sexually lonely. And that's no accusation. It's just an experience. I'm experiencing
Yeah.
sexual loneliness. And Glenn will be like, oh, babe, what's happening with that? And I'm like,
Mm.
well, I feel like we've just done too many quickies lately.
Mm.
And I have more fun when it's longer and there's real time for
Yeah.
play and pleasure.
Yeah.
And then he just hears me. I'm not pointing a finger. I'm not yelling at him. I'm not giving him the cold shoulder. It's a powerful way to communicate sexual joy and sexual loneliness. And that openness, I think, has drawn us together. Where
Hmm.
in the past, it would be more of, well, we haven't done it lately because you've been too busy.
Mm.
And that just sounds like such an accusation
Yeah.
instead of saying, man, I'm just feeling sexually lonely. And to be able to go, "Oh, what's happening with that?" And
Yeah.
showing up in that space is
Yeah.
so huge.
Yeah, we now realize, again, just scientifically, dynamic sexual connection is built on top of deep emotional connection.
Mhm.
That's the reason our foundations course is called Foundations, because we're building life on top of that, which again is how we're coded from birth. We're hardwired that way. Every 12-month-old on the planet conveys authentically at the core, vulnerably all the time. Well, there's no birthday where that's supposed to change. We don't say,
Mhm.
Happy birthday, Dan, you're 8. Now shut up. We don't want to hear from you anymore emotionally. That doesn't make any sense. But we
Mhm.
do that culturally, where Dan got
Mhm.
all these messages, especially as a man in this culture, that, well, men don't cry. They're just self contained. They're an island, they're a rock. And so then Dan and Glenn and women get the message as well, to stop experiencing what you're experiencing and to shut up about it.
That's
Mhm.
really good.
And I think just sexually, for me, sexually, to be able to even know that I am safe to say, "Well, I felt really pain,"
Yeah.
or "I felt really hurt last night when you spiraled and it
Mm.
kind of affected our whole sex date."
Yep.
And
Yep.
that he can make space for that. He can hear it. He can say, "Yeah, wow, I feel some guilt about that."
Yeah.
But it doesn't we're not in conflict, and it doesn't ruin us for days.
Right.
It's actually draws us closer together. And that is, to me, the incredible God piece in it that doesn't even make sense, that we can share the pain that we're experiencing with each other, and it brings us closer together.
Mm.
And I know that's not how we functioned
Mm.
early on in marriage.
Yep.
Everything was a fight. And I'm right or you're right. One of us has to be right. Instead of just going, no, I'm just experiencing pain in this. And it's just so powerful. I think that's why last night even I was able to show up,
Mm.
even though he was spiraling and kind of the woe is me. And it really almost looked like, Phyllis, this is all your fault
Mm.
in his verbiage. But I know it's not. And I know he's spiraling. And it gave me the power to show up for him and to be just able to emotionally give to the situation and pull him out. And so we still had a great, fun sexual encounter because it's like I can show up for you in that space because I know we're emotionally connected.
Mm.
And so that's the power of this kind of stuff and
Yeah.
being able to do that, showing up for each other emotionally just brings your sexual connection to another level.
That's really good.
Mm.
Great. Where can people go to find more about what you do and things like that?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So our website is connectioncodes.co, C-O. All this information is there. Glen has a private practice. So if you're stuck and you're like, oh my word, need to talk to them more, I would encourage you to book a session. That's on our website. We have a podcast as well. We talk about all this stuff, including like we go all over from sex to just emotional connection to kids. Like, how does this play out in the real world? So we love that. And we also have a book. It's on Amazon, The Connection Codes. So once you find us, you pretty much see that there's a whole
Yeah,
lot.
and I have to throw in there, we are halfway through our first cohort of
Mm,
coaches.
yeah,
So 8 weeks from now, we will have 18 coaches that are also available because we're pretty
yeah.
maxed out, which we love what we get to do. But now we're going to multiply this, which is just, we're psyched out of our minds about that. Tons of
Yeah,
joy. Yeah.
yeah.
Very good. Congratulations. Excellent.
Yeah,
All right.
excited.
Thank you. This has been fantastic.
I
Thank
love
you,
it.
Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you're interested in accelerating growth in your marriage, either sexually, emotionally, or spiritually, I want to invite you to work with me in my affordable coaching program called Next Level. More information about Next Level and my fun and sexy apps for couples are available at getyourmarriageon.com. Please also don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss a single episode. And be sure to tell your married friends. I promise, they will thank you for life. Now go get your marriage on.